Guys, welcome to another video. You've got Mr. Everything English as always, and today we are going to be looking at English Literature Paper 2. Now this paper, guys, is on May the 24th, and in this paper you have the modern text and you have the poetry, and the element that we will be looking at in this video is the element of the unseen poetry, which is the 24-mark question. Now, the reason I am behind the camera for this video is because I want to thoroughly break down for you this question, and I think it would be easier with you guys looking at the screen like this rather than me working on the board. So guys, on May 24th in the morning, you have your English Literature Paper 2 exam. And this exam, for those of you who are not aware, is a 2 hours and 15-minute exam. It is your longest English literature exam. And it looks at the modern text and it looks at the poetry. Your modern texts are texts like Inspector Calls and Blood Brothers. And then for poetry, you have 3 questions. You have your seen poetry, which is your power, conflict, and love. You have your unseen poetry 24 marker, and you have your unseen poetry 8 marker. Now, for the sake of this video, guys, we are looking at the unseen poetry 24 mark question. Now, this question, guys, it marks you on AO1 and it marks you on AO2. Now, AO1 is worth 12 marks and AO2 is also worth 12 marks. Now, when we look at AO1, guys, essentially looks at whether you've answered the question. And this predominantly begins by looking at your point. And then it looks at your use of quotations. And this comes across, guys, via your references. That is how you are marked when it comes to AO1. When we move on to AO2, AO2 looks at your ability to analyze the effect. And as you all know, in English, we are expected to analyze the effect, number 1, of language devices. Now, I expect everyone, hopefully, who's watching this video to know what a language device is. We're talking about things like similes, we're talking about metaphors, we're talking about personification, and so on. So that is what language devices looks at. Then the second thing that you must analyze, guys, is structural devices. Now, when it comes to this particular exam, we're not looking at foreshadowing, we're not looking at flashbacks, we're not looking at, short sentence, short paragraph. I would like all of you in your exam to talk about one of the following 3. You can either talk about the use of enjambment, or a caesura, or a volta. Now, what are these 3? Number 1, these 3 are subject-specific structural devices, which means you're only going to find them in poetry, which means you're setting yourself up to get much better chance of getting a higher grade. Now, what are these 3? Guys, enjambment is when there's a line of poetry. Guys, it's when there's a line of poetry, for example, that has no punctuation at the end, and instead the line carries on to the next. This is what we call enjambment. Caesura, guys, has this poem got an example of caesura? Yes. Guys, caesura is when there's punctuation throughout the line and nothing at the end. This is caesura. And your volta is your shift in the poem. Every poem has a volta. Every poem has a shift. It might go from being happy to being sad, from being angry to being calm. But when this poem shifts, this is known as the volta. And then you look at, guys, the form. The third thing that you want to be able to analyze is the form of poetry. Now, when you're in year 7 and when you're in year 8, teachers will teach you about things like haikus and so on. But we are a couple of weeks out from our GCSE exam, 5 or so weeks out to be precise. The only forms of poetry that we care about are the following 5. So these, guys, are the 5 forms of poetry that we care about. We care about an epic poem, we care about a narrative poem, we care about a sonnet, we care about a dramatic monologue, and we care about a free verse. I can almost guarantee you, guys, that the poem that you get, and actually no, I can't almost, I can guarantee you 100% that the poem you will get in your exam will always be one of these 5. Now, what do these 5 mean? Is a poem that is about an event, and for example, a death, a marriage, or war. A narrative poem is a poem that tells a story. A sonnet is a 14-line poem and is predominantly going to be about love. But this doesn't mean romantic love. It could be loving themselves and so on. A dramatic monologue, guys, this is a poem that is written in the first person and they tend to be biased. And then you have a free verse poem, guys, and this is a poem that has no rules. So here we have everything that you technically need to know about your 24-mark unseen poetry when it comes to the bones of the question. You know it's a 24-mark question. You know it's marking you on AO1 and AO2. It is not marking you on AO3, which is context, because the exam board do not expect you to know context for a poem that you've never ever seen before. Now, when it comes to AO1, it's looking at your use of quotes and the points that you raise in your paragraphs. Then you're looking at AO2. AO2, guys, is looking at the effect. But what is it looking at the effect of? It's looking at the effect of language devices, structural devices, and form. Now, you may ask the question, sir, can I get a high mark if I just talk about language devices? Depends what you mean by high mark. You can't get above a grade 7 if all you do is analyze language devices, because in the top band for grade 8 and grade 9, the exam board talks about how you must analyze the effect of language and structure and form. That is how they speak in the top band. Now, 24 marks. What are we doing for 24 marks? Guys, for a 24-mark question, you should be spending 30 minutes on this question. This is the time that you should be dedicating to this question. Now, in 30 minutes, guys, let's say you spend 5 minutes planning. You should be aiming to write 2 to 3 pretzel paragraphs, which I think is definitely possible. 2 is definitely 100% possible. 3 is possible. It just depends how much of the 30 minutes you spend on planning. I would say no more than 5 minutes when it comes to planning. So guys, 24 marks, 30 minutes, 2 to 3 pretzel paragraphs. But now here's the question. How do we put all of this into an essay? How do we put all of this into a piece of work that makes sense? Let's go over it now. In your exam, guys, you are aiming, let's say you're aiming for 3 paragraphs. Paragraph 1, paragraph 2, and paragraph 3. In each of the 3 paragraphs, we're going to be following pretzel. So we have P3. In your first paragraph, when it comes to your technique, my advice is talk about a language device. And when you zoom in to either a noun or a verb or an adjective or an adverb. Now, the reason we do this is because, number 1, we've now covered language devices. But number 2, the biggest problem that a lot of students find is, sir, I can't get started. I don't know what to begin with. That is why I say start easy, because it doesn't matter what you pick, as long as it's a language device or a word or a phrase. What matters more is how you talk about it in the effect. So after we talked about language devices and words and phrases in the first paragraph, in paragraph number 2, for our technique, we're going to pick a structural technique. This can be either enjambment, caesura, or volta. Only one. Analyze a structural technique. And then when you zoom in, talk about the form of the poem. Talk about how that is either epic, narrative, sonnet, dramatic, free verse. You decide on the day of your exam. Therefore, let's say, for example, by the end of paragraph 2, you happen to run out of time and you can't do paragraph number 3. At least by the end of paragraph 2, you've now done language, you've now done structure, you've now done form within 2 paragraphs. And you will naturally do point and reference, which means that within 2 paragraphs, you've now done AO1 and AO2. You've now set yourself up to get a very high mark out of 24. Now we move on that if you have time for paragraph 3, when it comes to your technique and when it comes to your zooming in, you pick whatever you want. So this is the structure. 3 paragraphs is what we're aiming for, but even 2 is fine. Here is a model answer, guys, that was published by the exam board. So, guys, this particular student, guys, first things first, as you can see, they wrote 2 paragraphs. 1 paragraph there and 1 paragraph there. So that is all they wrote in 30 minutes. And here is the mark scheme for this question. Have you answered the question? Have you used quotes? And have you got methods? Methods being structure, language, and form. If you do these 3 things, then this would come across as your point and your reference. Sorry, that would be your point, that would be your reference, and that would be your technique and your effect. So that is how you break down this question. Now let's read 1 paragraph.
Through autumn, Bowl presents the effects of autumn to be destructive and unwelcome. Bowl uses a semantic feel of chaos, shake, blown, chill, rage to suggest that autumn causes problem and turmoil. The word chill suggests discomfort and a somewhat sinister atmosphere which consumes the world, emphasizing that autumn causes the overwhelming effects being reflected in the overflowing lines. Bowl personifies autumn cunningly, his accomplice, to suggest that autumn is purposely destroying their peace, implying that it is evil and forceful. So in this
paragraph, the writer talks about enjambment, which is a structural device, and they talk about language devices. So they do that, and they do that, and they got point, and they got reference. So they do both AO1 and AO2 within this first paragraph. And they did a total of 2 paragraphs. Now, what would you think AQA would give a paragraph like this, guys? They gave it 24 out of 24. They gave these 2 paragraphs full marks. It's not there to catch you out, so long as you stick to a structure. Because what I find is so many students, unfortunately, just aren't told how to structure and answer the question. In your mind, guys, honestly, all of this is general knowledge. What you care about is the purple. What you care about is, okay, on the day of my exam, what am I going to do? I'm either going to do 2 paragraphs or I'm either going to do 3 paragraphs. In these 3 paragraphs, I must make sure that I talk about language, structure, and form. Now, guys, let's go through a poem and plan a full answer. This question says, guys, in The Richest Poor Man in the Valley, how does the poet present ideas about living a happy and contented life? So, guys, how does the poet present the ideas about living a happy and contented life? Let's begin.
On the outside, he seemed older than he was. His face was like a weather map, full of bad weather, while inside, his heart was fat with the sun. With his 2 dogs, he cleared a thin silver path across the black mountain, and when winter kicked in, they brought his sheep down from the top like sulky clouds. Harry didn't care for things like other people's pride, like money, houses, bank accounts, and lies. He was living in a caravan until the day he died. But at his funeral, his friends' tears fell like 1,000 diamonds.
So, how does the poet present ideas about living a happy and contented life? I would first talk about, guys, this part here. Harry didn't care for things that other people prize, like money, houses, bank accounts, and lies. Now, this here, guys, when it comes to this particular paragraph, remember, guys, we're planning pretzel, right? So pretzel is the structure that we are planning for. So this here is my reference. The technique that I'm going to talk about here is the technique of enjambment. I'll explain why and how later. That is my technique now complete. So that's what my technique is. And when I zoom in for this paragraph, I'm going to talk about how this poem is a narrative poem because it tells the story of this man. And what's my point here, guys? The idea of living a happy and contented life is don't follow the crowd. That's the point that comes to life here. That from this quote, we realize that to have a happy life, don't just follow what other people are doing. Don't just follow trends. Rather, try to create your own history. Try to create your own path. And use the juxtaposition on these lines over here. I'm going to use the technique, guys, of juxtaposition. Now, juxtaposition, guys, is when you have 2 opposing ideas. Now, what's the 2 opposing ideas? We're going to compare how Harry's face looked like a weather map, but his heart was fat with the sun. So his heart juxtaposed his face. So that's going to be my technique. And all of this is my reference. And my point here, guys, is to live a happy life. Don't judge by what you see. Because if you saw Harry Is it Harry? Why am I calling him Harry? Oh, because his name's Harry. Sorry, guys, I had a bit of a moment there. Why am I calling this guy Harry when he's not Harry? But his name is Harry. Guys, so it's saying that, look, don't judge people. Harry, on the outside, looked terrible. But in the inside, he was full of joy, full of warmth. And now when I zoom in, so his face was like a weather map full of bad weather, while inside his heart was fat with sun. I'm going to zoom in, guys, to the word heart. Guys, I'm going to zoom in here to the word heart. And this here is a noun, and that is what I will be zooming into. And there you have it, guys. I have now planned 2 paragraphs ready to go for my exam. Done. That is exactly what you do on the exam. Don't be that person, guys, who spends hours and hours trying to understand every single line of writing, every single line of poetry. Rather, in your exam, you just want to make sure that you understand enough so you're able to begin your writing. That's it. We're not bothered about anything else. All we care about is, can we find 2 to 3 paragraphs that have language, that have structure, and that have form. Now, guys, what I'm going to do for you guys is I'll write out one of these paragraphs. I would begin my paragraph always, guys, with a basic point. I would always begin with a basic point just to get me going. So let's begin. In the poem, happiness goes hand in hand with not following the crowd. That was the first thing that I did. Then what I do, guys, is I then move on and I explain the point. This is because rather than chasing society and what it defines as happiness, Harry is able to find this from his own accord. So, guys, now what I did was I explained my point. So I turned a basic point into a much better point. The next thing you do, guys, in the paragraph is you add some synonyms to describe the character. This will allow you to get some more detail. Harry is therefore brave, courageous, and able to stand on his own 2 feet. Then, guys, we introduce the quote. And this is the last thing we do when it comes to the point of the paragraph. Then, guys, we introduce the quote. This can be seen on lines 15 to 18. And then that would count as my reference. As I'm not going to quote 4 lines, 15, 16, 17, 18. That's too much lines to quote. So I can refer to them like that. And now, guys, if we look, here is my point and my reference now complete. Now, even though we break down the point into these 4 sections, to the exam board, that's going to be one whole point. And therefore, you will get the mark for detail. Because rather than just saying that happiness goes hand in hand with not following the crowd, we've elaborated, we've added synonyms, and we've introduced the quote. After introducing my quote, I go straight in there, guys, with the next part of the paragraph, and I discuss my technique. Here, the writer uses enjambment. I go straight in there. I don't waste time, guys. I go straight in there, and what do? I mention the technique that I will be analyzing. Don't do stuff like the writer uses many different techniques. One of these techniques is this. Just go straight in there, guys, because we haven't got time to play about with sentences that are not getting us any marks. So here the writer uses enjambment to illustrate how the chase of money and power, the chase of what ordinary people yearn, means they want, is never ending. That's effect number one. The way the line goes on and on is the same way the chase goes on and on. That's effect number two. And let's finish off with the third effect. However, the abrupt pause on line 18 highlights how Harry does not live like this. It separates his life from this, and that was effect number three. But all of this again would be marked as one wholesome effect. Now let's zoom in. Furthermore, the narrative form of this poem. So that was my zooming in, guys. I'm now zooming in and talking about the form and how this links to Harry not following the crowd. Furthermore, the narrative form of this poem reflects how this man and his behavior is so unique that his story needs to be told. It cannot be concealed or hidden. That's my effect, guys. And now let's link everything back to my point. As a result, it is clear that Harry and his happiness is an outcome of him swimming against the tide. Never following the crowd. And there is Mark. And there you have one complete pretzel paragraph now done. Now guys, when it comes to pretzel, right? Yes, the blue is how everyone writes, but the red is your step-by-step breakdown of what you do for each step. Now, if you can produce 2, even 3 of those for your writing, you will be in a very strong position. So please do aim to do that really, really well. So guys, there's your pretzel paragraph, there's your red, which is your breakdown, and then the black, guys, is the paragraph written out in full. Now let's go over and recap everything that we did. So guys, the first thing is, Anthony Poetry is 24 marks, 30 minutes, and it's marking you on AO1 and AO2. You are aiming for 3 paragraphs, but even 2 is enough, and you have a total of 30 minutes to get this question done. When you read the poem, guys, you highlight what you're going to use and you plan on your page. After you've done your plan for 2 or 3 paragraphs, which must include language, structure and form, you then begin to produce your paragraph. And step by step, guys, you build your paragraph. Now remember, guys, you're marked on your AO1 and you're marked on your AO2. Everything in this paragraph is earning you marks. Point is AO1, reference is AO1. Your technique is AO2, your effect is AO2. Your zooming in is AO2 and AO1 because you have technique and you have quote. Your effect is AO2 and your link is AO1 because it's showing you've answered the question. So guys, pretzel helps you address AO1 and AO2 beautifully. If you ever struggle with pretzel, this breaks down how to build the paragraph bit by bit. Now, the reason we do more than one effect, we do 3 effects, is to get the mark for detail, which is how you jump into the top band. All right, guys, on the day of your exam, please make sure you hit 2 paragraphs as a minimum, 3 if you have time. Thank you for your time, guys. As always, it's been Mr. Everything English. Peace.